بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So last time we had started talking about when we have an irreconcilable case. If you have a situation where there's a narrator, there's a lot of discussion around that narrator, and how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the narrator when there's a difference of opinion concerning him? And we said that there are three major steps. What were those steps? There's three major steps that we take. So it's going to be very far back. So firstly, the first thing that we need to do is when we have a difference of opinion over a narrator is determining, okay, is the difference of opinion concerning that narrator actual? Right? Is it a real difference of opinion, or is it something that's perceived? Yeah, or is like, okay, is the description right? Did we misunderstand it? Right? There are a number of things that were explored concerning that. And then, if we do have a difference of opinion and we determine it is actual, the next step is to do something that's called tarjih, right? Where we decide, we make a decision, we weigh in the different opinions, and we determine which opinion is stronger. And if I don't have enough information for me to make a valid decision, I do something that's called tawaqquf, right, where I suspend my ruling on that particular narrator. So where are we right now? We're still in the decision stage, right? So the last part of the decision stage is, right, when we cannot reconcile, right? And one of the ways that help us reconcile, right? So if you have a difference of opinion concerning someone, you can do something that has to do with irreconcilability. Meaning that if I have two sets of statements, right? If I have two sets of statements and I can't really reconcile them, so the next thing I can actually look at is it possible that the Imam, when he made that statement, he wasn't being fair? Right? It's a possibility. Why? Because they're human, right? And humans make mistakes. Humans have their own personal biases. Humans have their own personal inclinations, and that is going to translate over to narrators, like when they make their ahkam, when they make their rulings. So there are a number of things. Number one, like we said, they're human, and humans are affected by desires and emotions, which is something that is very natural. They're affected by the doubts that they hear or they find out about a particular individual, so they'll act on those doubts. And then when you combine these two things, it can really cloud that person's or that individual's judgment. It's important to note that they're not solely directed by their desires, right? Because they're imam. Otherwise, these individuals wouldn't be considered imams, right? And we trust imams to, in general, make sound decisions. Also, the doubt, that it has to be a reasonable doubt, right? So we know that if there is a doubt in the ruling, it's not something outrageous. It could have skewed, yes, absolutely, but it's not going to be like this outrageous doubt that we have concerning this particular narrator. So some things to keep in mind. Sometimes, as humans, we have a moment of weakness. Just because somebody's righteous doesn't mean that that person will never commit sin. Right? It might, right? But we would still call that person righteous. And it's the same thing here. Just because an imam makes a misstep or he makes a mistake, does that remove him from his position of imamah? No, right? He's still an imam. He's still a scholar. He's still somebody that is to be recognized and still somebody considered to be respected. The problem is when we love something, what happens is that it usually tends to blind and deafen us, right? Because we have this emotional cloud, right? Not to be considered like confused with Nova Scotian smoke, right? Allah protect us, man. Allah make things easy, man. Like it's like, what was it, 6 million acres? Right, it's like more than 6 million acres on fire. Well, I can't even imagine that. right? That's crazy. Allah protect us and them. I mean, yeah. Allah musta'an. So it only happens occasionally, right? So even if we do determine or we find out there's a situation that there's that there might have been some injustice that happened, or there might have been a oversight on the part of the imam, can we use that as an excuse every single time? No, right? That doesn't make sense. We can use it occasionally, but we can't use it every single time. And we can use it with a particular narrator, and we can't apply it generally. Imams differed in different ways. Why? Because they lived at different times, right? So there's a possible difference that happens there. They lived in different lands, right? So there's that possibility also extends. They have different teachers. They have different schools of thought, different individual motivations and drives. But even with all of these things, we still consider them to be just, right? Because we see, and why do we know that? Because we see a lot of shared rulings. Even though if we look at all of these differences, logically, you would think that most of the conclusions they arrive at, would you think them to be the same, or would you think them to be different? No, I'm saying, like, if you look at all these differences that the different imams had, would you think that all of these people, when they made rulings, that they would come to the same conclusions, or would they come to different ones? Like, just logically. They would be different. They would be different. Why? Because they're different people. They're different people in different places. You would imagine that, okay, if these people were motivated by other than being just, by other than being upright, that every single conclusion, like, what are the chances that by chance that they came to the same conclusion on a whole bunch of different narrators? Are the chances high or low? They're very low, right? They're very low. If you have all of these people, so if I took, for example, and I said, hey, what do you guys think about the color blue? And I sat down, how many opinions would I get? Would everybody, is it possible that everybody agrees that blue is the best color? No. You'll have some people who think it is, yes. And some of them will think it's what? The worst color. And then you'll have a spectrum in between. But what are the possibilities that they'll all come to the conclusion that blue is the best color? Or what is the possibility that they'll all come to the conclusion blue is the worst color? It's a low chance. Like, you just don't know, right? But over here with the narrators, like, even though they all had differing motivations, even though they all had differing backgrounds, even though they all had different incentives, they would still many times come to similar conclusions. And we, again, this is this idea of assuming that their rulings were just. Sure. If they were what? If they were honest and they were right? So, and I'm saying that's the assumption that it's like these individuals, like you right? They'd have to be honest and they'd have to be pursuing the same thing. These factors, no, I know they should affect people who are not honest, right? So this is actually a proof that they are honest and upright. So what are some examples? There are two major examples here that show that they were just and they were upright. The first of them is toward the people of innovation. Because as a scholar, how does this scholar look at innovators? Are these people that should be raised up and praised and used as examples in the Muslim community to them? Right. So when it came to their innovation, when they spoke about that innovation, how did they speak about it? They would absolutely refute it. So if you asked Imam Ahmed about the Khawarij, or if you asked Imam Bukhari or Muslim, what would they say about the Khawarij? They'd be like, no, they're pretty good people, you know what I mean? No. They'd refute them. They say, no, their belief system is false. But they would accept their narrations. What does that tell us about them? So this tells us about these imams that even though I fundamentally disagree with this person, I'm still willing to accept their narrations. Another one, toward their family. You would have scholars, and what would they do? They would actually speak about family members. They would say, my father is weak. Or they would say, my son is a liar. Even though, as as an individual, what do we want to do for those close relations? Right, we naturally want to protect them. But for them, they were so just, and they were so upright, and they were so honest, that they still would criticize them. So what are some things that we can look for in terms of something being a praise or something being a rejection? So if the criticism is towards someone who is considered an imam and agreed upon his status, and somebody criticizes him. So if I have an imam, like Imam Bukhari, and then I have 2 or 3 people criticizing him, what should I do with those criticisms? I should test them, right? I should be like, is Imam Bukhari actually an imam because these 2 people criticized him? I have a so here, I'm saying 2. How many imams are there? There's just 2 imams? And then we... like, they're like... So like hadith critics, if I have dozens, right? I have dozens of hadith critics. And what do most of them say about Imam Bukhari? They praise him, his hifz, his amana, his religiosity. All of them are talking good. And then I have 2 people criticize him. They say he's weak. I have to investigate, right? Huh? Okay, I have to give them the benefit of the doubt. Okay. Okay. Abdullah, what do you think? Should I give them the time of day? Should I even bother investigating? So you agree with Os? You're like, these deserve investigating. What do you think about him? No, I'm saying I should give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Yes. You're with them? Okay. I completely disagree. His imam is established. His imam is established. There's even a few criticisms here and there. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to even give them the benefit of the doubt. Huh? I'm sorry? Oh, you're with the majority? Okay, yeah. Okay, that's understood. Yeah. No, I mean, because the thing is, like, if I have dozens of scholars saying, he's praiseworthy, and he's just like 1 or 2 out of them, it doesn't matter who they are. That would be it would be rejected. And the opposite also holds true. If I have dozens of scholars saying that this guy's a liar, and then I have 2 scholars who are saying, no, he's a really pious guy, and this and that. Right? Again, it's like you would not give them you'd be like, oh, I need to be objective and all this. Yeah. Right. You already disproved from stage 1. Like when you have an overwhelming group of people who are speaking so positively about him, and people who are probably even closer. So what are some secondary signs? So these are some major things that we would. This is what at these 2 things are examples of where you wouldn't accept the opposing view, like initially. You wouldn't even bother with it. You wouldn't waste your time. What are some secondary signs I would look for? So if I have multiple praises of someone and then I have an individual criticism, possibility. This you might want to give a little bit more credence to. Just a little bit more. The first one is rejected. The second stage, you want to give a little bit more credence. Or the opposite, right? So if you have an individual praise in front of multiple criticisms. These are secondary signs, but these are not going to be as strong as the first situation. And like I said, these themselves are not enough to say that this critic was particularly unjust, because at the end of the day, there are 2 possibilities. There's a personal ijtihad that an individual makes and a personal conclusion that they come to. And the second possibility is that he made a mistake. So what are some strong supporting evidences that we will look for? So if there is something in the relationship or something about the person that we know might affect the ruling on that individual. So for example, if we know them to be personal enemies, right? If we know they had beef with each other, is that a reason for me? Would I utilize that? That's a red flag, right? I might be like, okay, I might have to doubt this ruling here. Another reason, a different polemic school, like, oh, he's Ash'ari or he's Maturidi or he's, So because there's from different polemic schools, is there a chance that will influence my ruling? Yes, there is. Different juristic school, like he's Shafi and I'm Hanafi, Also, this also applies. Having good judgment of others. So what does this mean? Meaning that I'm overly, I look for excuses to what? To accept. This is the opposite, right? So the first three, these are excuses to what? To reject. This last one is actually the opposite. This is an excuse to, oh, we should assume good about all Muslims. Does that work in narration? No. Is it okay in general? Yeah, sure. Right. I can assume good about Muslims, but when it comes to narration, this is not what I want to start with. So anytime there's an exaggerated praise of someone, right? So again, it's a red flag. Right, it's a red flag. Like, he is like, he's the imam of the era, and he's like amazing, and like he's memorized this, and he's done that, and blah blah blah. And like you're like, yeah, I don't know how realistic, that actually is. Like, can it apply to specific individuals? Like, sure, but this person who's not known to be a major imam, like you're almost describing him as if he was an imam. And there are other supporting evidences that we can definitely look at just to help us come to the conclusion to assume that particular imam was mistaken in his specific ruling. Taib. Now, if I don't have enough supporting evidence, I might feel that the imam was being unjust, but I don't have enough evidence to prove either way. So what am I going to do? So it's always the safe assumption. The safe assumption is to assume that the critic was being just. Right? Because what did we say? We said the rule is that when an imam makes a ruling, is that he is what? Do we assume he's being fair or unfair? Now, by default, he's what? By default, we assume he's being fair. Right? By default, we assume he's being fair. So at that point, if I can't tell if he's being unfair or not, I'm going to... Because remember, we're talking about here, I can't tell. Right. So I would assume he's being fair. Absolutely. And this doesn't mean even if I assume that imam is being fair, do I need to take his ruling? No, it's not necessary. Like I don't have to follow it. I have to look. I'm going to weigh in everything. But when it comes to this particular imam, it's not necessary that I agree with his ruling. And there's a very famous statement of Imam al-Dhahabi. He says, "Kalam al-aqran yutwa wa la yurwa." So basically, he says that when you have peers speaking about each other, then their speech is to be rejected, and it shouldn't be narrated. Sure. So here, the critique of peers is rejected, not narrated. Meaning that if you have two peers criticizing each other, I shouldn't what? I should reject it. Why? Well, okay. I mean, that can be part of it. So why do you think he said this, though? So I want to think about this. What is the problem when you have peers reviewing each other? All right, there can be a conflict of interest. What else? I'm sorry? Oh, because they're on similar standing. Like, how can you determine? Right? Oh, yeah. So who has a higher position? Okay. All those things. Not just that. Like, between peers, is there a chance of jealousy? Right. Absolutely. Right. But, It's higher than you think. If you have two people who are working in the same field, doing the same work, the chances of jealousy are actually they're very high, right? They're very high. So like amongst doctors, there's going to be jealousy. Amongst imams, right? There's going to be jealousy. Amongst plumbers, lawyers, whatever field you're in, as whenever there's competition, there's going to be some sense of jealousy that's there. But is this always true? And what did Imam al-Dhahabi say when he meant that? It's not always true, right? So the thing is, it's a possibility, right? There's a chance that it exists, but at the end of the day, how can I learn about a narrator except if I don't ask who? No, if I don't ask his peers, right? Can I find out about someone like 300 years ago? I can, but who am I going to talk to? Am I going to talk to the people before him? Am I going to talk to the people after him? Huh? No, that's fine. Right? I'm going to have to read what his peers had to say about him. Like, that's the only way to actually, that's not only is it the only way, it's the best way to find out about someone. Yes? If I have a choice between, it's like, okay, well, these people, they're actually his fellow students. All right, these people, like, they're telling me what they heard about him. Sure, like we said before, like we assume that they're being fair, right? They're being honest and fair. When would that apply? Yeah. So if I said, hey, this critique between peers is not something that should be narrated. When would that apply? Huh? Yeah. So when would it be? When we see that there's a bias, right? When we were talking about it before, like this whole discussion was like, if I'm like, he's clearly being unfair in his judgment of this person, and at that point I can definitely use this principle, because I'll be like, no, he's not being fair, right? What he said here, he's being unfair, he's being unjust. Why is he being unfair and unjust? Because they were peers, and he's clearly what? Okay, why? What do we call that? Jealousy, right? Like, he's clearly jealous. He's clearly jealous, and that's why he criticized him. And sometimes that can be, you can be aware of your jealousy, and sometimes it's not, you're not as aware of it, right? So the second one, tarjih. So we finished the entire discussion of, can we actually determine if there was a criticism? Is the criticism established or not? So now we're going to say, okay, how do I make an informed decision? What are some of the steps that I would take? So there are two types of criticisms that happen. You have explicit and you have vague or general. An explicit criticism, or jarh mufassar, what does that mean? It means that he not only does he disparage that person, but he gives the reason of why he critiqued him. And the opposite of that would be vague or general, meaning that he didn't do what? So he said, huwa life, for example. I have Imam Bukhari, he says, huwa life, he's weak. Did he tell me why he's weak? Is it because he's lying? Is it because he has weak memory? Or is it... Right, it's what? It's vague, it's general. So in these two situations, which one do you think gets priority? Explicit. In general, the explicit criticism will get priority. Except when it's done unjustly, or if it's clearly that's unjust. What is the second reason that it could happen? That the imam made a mistake. So we're going to revolve. This is going to actually come up and repeat itself a lot. If the imam is being unfair, or he made a mistake, and how do I determine that? Now I have to look at secondary proofs, and I have to look at secondary sources, and I have to look at secondary evidences. I have to research, right? I have to research and to help me determine on whether that was founded or it was not. And what are some of the things that we look at? We can look at a number of things, like in terms of the status of the imam, who are some of the students, what did they say, when did they say this, the number of scholars that have spoken about this individual, right? So there's a lot of supporting evidence that's there. A general critique is always given preference over praise. So over here, there are two types. So we said there's explicit and there's general or vague. But in vague, if I have one who says that he's thiqa and another one that says he's da'if, for example. So one said that he's good and one said that he's weak. Which one gets preference? The good or the weak? The good gets preference? Huh? That's in a comparative setting. I'm just saying that we have a statement. Huwa thiqa, huwa da'if. From two different imams. Which one is going to get preference? Yes. Well, they're not, and we'll talk about how and why. Oh, they could be equally educated. They might not be, concerning this narrator, equally informed. So which one would you choose in general? No, you don't. No, you would choose the one. You would choose the criticism. In this situation, you would give preference to the criticism. Why? Because the critic has more information about the narrator. There's something he knows. Yes, because we said that if we look at the narrations of someone and in general, we don't see any problems with them, the assumption is that he is what? Accepted. But what if I know about the narrator he's a liar? Can a liar narrate sound a hadith? Yes, he can. Yes, he can. And if I look at a narration and the narration looks sound, and I don't know anything about the narrator, what can I assume? That the narrator is also sound. But this imam, he's like, man, I know the narrator. This dude's a liar. Do you see what happened there? How else would he know he's a liar? He'd have to be informed, right? It's not necessarily experience. Like, experience is definitely a part of it, like from dealing with a lot of riwayat. But if a person actually knows him, he's like, nah, man, that dude's a liar, dude. Oh, with the narrator, yeah. Yeah, so he's more informed versus the other scholar who was not as informed about him. So we would assume, because we had said that the reasons to be criticized are very limited, but the reasons to be praised are many. And if we understand that the reasons for criticism are limited, then that means that the critic has more information about the narrator. Ahsant. You have a question, or you just... I saw your hand go up. Yeah. I was like, Osi usually doesn't ask questions like that. He just starts yelling. So, over here, Khatib Baghdadi, he says in his Kifaya, acting on the statement of a critic is not an accusation of the one praising because the critic has more information. Are you guys following? So basically, if I listen to the critic, am I saying about the one who's praising that he doesn't know what he's talking about? No, not necessarily. And that's what he's saying here. Because why? Because the critic has more information. That's all that's being stated, and that's all that's being said. I'm sorry, my OCD is kicking in. I do, actually. Possibly. I haven't gotten diagnosed. Because the critic has more information.